Jerusalem. Mystery Babylon the Great, mother of all harlots. This teaching will give the biblical interpretation of the prophetic Babylon according to Revelation 18:10 through 13. Standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold, and silver, and precious stones, and of pearls, and fine linen, and purple, and silk, and scarlet, and all fine wood, and all manner of vessels of ivory, and all manner of vessels of most precious wood, and of brass, and iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. This prophetic Babylon is described as having a third temple, which will be a focal point of this teaching. Study reference verses that allude to the coming third temple include Revelation 11, verse 1 and 2, Revelation 17, verse 4, Revelation 18, 11 through 13, Daniel 11, 31, and Daniel 11, 38. Temple artifacts and ordinances are described in these Bible verses. The coming third temple in Jerusalem is what is described, making it one among many indicators that Jerusalem is that great city Babylon. Many scriptures point to Jerusalem being the prophetic Babylon. For example, Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 30 reveals Jerusalem as a whorish woman. The prophetic mystery Babylon is also known in Revelation chapter 17 verse 1 as the great whore. In the book of Ezekiel chapter 16, Jerusalem is further described as one who commits abominations and fornication. In Revelation 17 verse 4, you see Mystery Babylon described as a whorish woman who commits abominations and fornications. In Ezekiel chapter 16, you see that Samaria and Sodom were sisters of Jerusalem that were given to be daughters of Jerusalem. And in Ezekiel chapter 23, you see that Samaria is listed as a harlot. This makes Jerusalem a mother of harlots and confirms that Jerusalem is Babylon, that great city, the mother of harlots, mentioned in Revelation 17 verse 5. Both these Ezekiel verses describing Jerusalem and these Revelation verses describing prophetic Babylon have temple-related characteristics mentioned alongside them in context. These details will be covered later in this teaching. Jerusalem is a centerpiece for biblical prophecy, with significant events involving the coming third temple. The Antichrist will take over the third temple with the Islamic armies as they take over Jerusalem. This is the event described in Revelation chapter 11 verse 1 and 2, with the Gentiles, being the Muslim jihadists, taking over the holy city Jerusalem for 42 months. This taking of the temple is described in Revelation chapter 11 verse 1 and 2, in Daniel chapter 9 verse 27, in Daniel chapter 11 verse 31, in Daniel 11 verse 45, and in Matthew 24 verse 15. In the ESV, in Daniel chapter 11 verse 31, you see the forces of the Antichrist come into the temple. They stop the sacrifices and set up the abomination in Jerusalem. These forces are the Antichrist's armies, which are the Muslim jihadists that will come into Jerusalem, that will take over the temple and stop the sacrifices. We see in Daniel 9:27 that the sacrifices will be stopped and that the abomination that makes desolate will be set up in Jerusalem. The location of the Antichrist's rule and his palace is at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. We know this because Daniel chapter 11 verse 45 says, "And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him." The location between the seas and the glorious holy mountain is Jerusalem, between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, at the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount, or glorious holy mountain, is where the coming third temple will be. It is the location which is described as the holy place in Matthew 24:15. There will be more detail about the holy place later on in this teaching. Islamic prophecy teaches their Al-Mahdi, their coming Messiah, will come to Jerusalem and establish a caliphate capital. At this time, the Antichrist will enforce the Babylonian-style religion from Jerusalem. In ancient Babylon, in Daniel chapter 3, the king of Babylon made a decree that everybody, at the sound of the music, must bow down and worship. Those that did not bow down and worship at the sound of the music were to be killed. Many parallels are seen between what is happening in ancient Babylon and what will happen in the end at Jerusalem. In Revelation 13 verse 15, you see a Babylonian-style worship that parallels what is found in Daniel 3 being implemented at Jerusalem. This is parallel to what will occur when Islam takes Jerusalem for its caliphate capital. Sharia law will be decreed. At the sound of the azan, the Islamic call to prayer, everybody must bow down and worship or they will be killed. Ancient Babylonian worship is alive and well through Islam and will be enforced from Jerusalem, hence the name Mystery Babylon the Great. Abomination of desolation. According to the scriptures, the abomination that causes desolation occurs in Jerusalem. This is confirmed when looking in Daniel 9:27, Daniel 11:31, Daniel 12:11, and Matthew 24:15 in context. In Daniel 9:27, we see the sacrifices stopped, which is referring to the coming third temple in Jerusalem. And the verse goes on to mention the abomination of desolation. This is again reiterated in Daniel 11:31 as it mentions the temple sacrifices being stopped and the abomination that makes desolate being set up. This is further confirmed in Daniel 12:11 as it describes the sacrifices being stopped and the abomination of desolation set up. The Lord Yeshua, Jesus himself, referred to these verses as recorded in Matthew 24:15, saying, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand." The Lord declared that believers would see the abomination of desolation in the holy place. Once again, this holy place is the location of the temple in Jerusalem. In the synoptic gospels of Matthew and Luke, we see the same account mentioned in Matthew 24, verse 15 and 16, and Luke chapter 21, verse 20 and 21. First, the book of Matthew. In Matthew 24, 15 and 16, you see it says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains." In this account, it is clear that the believers will see the abomination of desolation in Jerusalem and are warned to flee Judea into the mountains. The book of Luke gives the same account, but in addition defines Jerusalem as the one to be made desolate. In Luke 21, verse 20 and 21, it says, "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto." This account makes clear that it is Jerusalem that is to be made desolate. The abomination that will cause the desolation of Jerusalem will be set up at the third temple. This is foretold as a warning for believers to flee to the mountains once they witness this abomination, as there will be danger to their lives. Believers are also told not to return back into Jerusalem because of the desolation that is to come. Jerusalem's abominations is the reason there is a desolation that is to come. This is why in Revelation 18 verse 19, Mystery Babylon, that great city, is mentioned as being made desolate. Jerusalem has been described as having abominations and desolation. Mystery Babylon is also described as having abomination in Revelation 17:4 and desolation in Revelation 18:19, further confirming that Jerusalem is Mystery Babylon. The merchant's merchandise. The prophecy says people will be made rich through the great city Babylon's costliness. We now look to the merchants and merchandise mentioned in Revelation 18:11 through 13 to see what the merchants have been made rich by. "And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones, and of pearls, and fine linen, and purple, and silk, and scarlet, and all fine wood, and all manner of vessels of ivory, and all manner of vessels of most precious wood, and of brass, and iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men." Now let us look at Old Testament temple scriptures, which give invaluable insight as they highlight the connection to Revelation 18:11 through 13, beginning with verse 12. "The gold, the precious stones, the fine linen, the purple, and the scarlet are all items used for the high priest ephod in the temple." In Exodus chapter 39 verse 1 through 3, we see the ephod mentioned, and it says, "And of the blue and purple and scarlet they made clothes of service, to do service in the holy place, and made the holy garments for Aaron as the Lord commanded Moses. And he made the ephod of gold, blue, and purple, and scarlet, and fine twined linen. And they did beat the gold into thin plates, and cut it into wires, to work it in the blue, and in the purple, and in the scarlet, and in the fine linen with cunning work." This is the same reason why in the past prophecies Jerusalem is described in Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 13 as being clothed with gold, silver, and fine linen. This is because Jerusalem was decked with the temple. In the temple, the high priest would wear this ephod, and on this ephod there was a breastplate, and that breastplate was decked with gold and with precious stones, purple and scarlet. This breastplate is what is mentioned in Exodus chapter 39 verse 9 through 14, and it says, "It was 4 square. They made the breastplate double. A span was the length thereof, and a span the breadth thereof, being doubled. And they set in it 4 rows of stones. The first row was a sardius, a topaz, and a carbuncle. This was the first row. The second row, an emerald, a sapphire, and a diamond. And the third row, a ligure, an agate, an amethyst. And the fourth row, a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. They were enclosed in ouches of gold in their enclosings. And the stones were according to the names of the children of Israel, 12, according to their names, like the engravings of a signet, everyone with his name, according to the 12 tribes. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 1 through 3, we see these precious stones mentioned in the temple construction. Furthermore, David the king said unto all the congregation, Solomon my son, whom alone God hath chosen, is yet young and tender, and the work is great. For the palace is not for man, but for the Lord God. Now I have prepared with all my might for the house of my God the gold for things to be made of gold, the silver for things of silver, and the brass for the things of brass, the iron for the things of iron, the wood for the things of wood, onyx stones, and stones to be set, glycerine stones, and of divers colors, and all manner of precious stones, and marble stones in abundance. Moreover, because I have set my affection to the house of my God, I have of my own proper good, of gold and silver, which I have given to the house of my God, over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house. We see in verse 2, the precious stones are mentioned, talking about the ephod in the construction of the temple. This is why we see in Revelation 17:4, the purple, the scarlet, the gold, and the precious stones. This Bible verse is talking about Mystery Babylon being clothed with an ephod and the temple. Further in the prophecy about Babylon, we see in Revelation 18 verse 16, it says that Babylon is clothed with fine linen, purple, scarlet, gold, and precious stones. These items listed together are specific for the ephod and the construction of the temple, further confirming that Jerusalem is Mystery Babylon. There are terms used in the prophecy describing vessels. This is a term used for temple service items. In Revelation chapter 18 verse 12, we see this listed as vessels of precious wood. In the past, when Babylon invaded Jerusalem and took over the temple and ransacked it, they took back with them these vessels. In Daniel chapter 5, verse 1 through 4, it reads, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. The king and his princes, his wives and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. Much like Belshazzar, king of Babylon, who is dedicating these temple artifacts to their foreign gods, the Antichrist will be in the third temple honoring his god Allah with these temple artifacts, as seen here in Daniel 11 verse 38. Some of these vessels were precious wood covered with gold and silver. They were for the temple service. In Exodus chapter 30 verse 25 through 28, it says, And thou shalt make it an oil of holy ointment, an ointment compound after the art of the apothecary. It shall be an holy anointing oil. And thou shalt anoint the tabernacle of the congregation therewith, and the ark of the testimony, and the table and all his vessels, and the candlestick and his vessels, and the altar of incense, and the altar of burnt offering with all his vessels, and the laver and his foot. This more specifically describes the vessels of most precious wood. In Revelation 18:12, it describes this fine wood and precious wood. The merchants of gold and silver and precious stones, and of pearls, and fine linen, and purple, and silk, and scarlet, and all fine wood, and all manner vessels of ivory, and all manner vessels of most precious wood, and of brass, and iron, and marble. The precious wood is used in these artifacts in the temple construction. In Exodus chapter 25, verse 10 and 11, it says, "And they shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, within and without shalt thou overlay it, and shall make upon it a crown of gold round about." This is just one example of a vessel of precious wood. The word thine from Revelation 18:12 in the Strong's Concordance, number G2367, says, "In the sense of blowing, denoting a certain fragrant tree, made of citron wood." Such scented wood was used in the construction of the temple that Solomon made in Jerusalem. In 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 14 through 16, it says, "So Solomon built the house and finished it. And he built the walls of the house within with boards of cedar, both the floor of the house and the walls of the ceiling. And he covered them on the inside with wood, and covered the floor of the house with planks of fir. And he built 20 cubits on the sides of the house, both the floor and the walls with boards of cedar. He even built them for it within, even for the oracle, even for the most holy place." More detail about this scented wood that's used in the construction of the temple is found in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 20 through 22. "And the oracle in the forepart was 20 cubits in length, and 20 cubits in breadth, and 20 cubits in height thereof. And he overlaid it with pure gold, and so covered the altar which was of cedar. So Solomon overlaid the house within with pure gold, and he made a partition by the chains of gold before the oracle, and he overlaid it with gold. And the whole house he overlaid with gold, until he finished all the house. Also, the whole altar that was by the oracle he overlaid with gold." This is why the fine and precious wood is mentioned in Revelation 18:12. It directly relates to prophetic Babylon having a coming third temple. In Revelation 18 verse 12, we also see that the brass is mentioned. This brass relates to the altar and other temple vessels. Let us look to Old Testament verses to confirm this. 2 Chronicles chapter 4 verse 1 says, "Moreover, he made an altar of brass, 20 cubits of length thereof, and 20 cubits the breadth thereof, and 10 cubits the height thereof." This is the brass altar before the temple, and this is not the only item in the temple made of brass in the construction of the temple, as you see here in 1 Chronicles chapter 29 verse 2. In Exodus chapter 27 verse 3, we also see other vessels being made of brass. Laver of brass. The brass laver is found in Exodus chapter 30 verse 18. The temple construction had these brass lavers that were used for the washing of the priests. The brass laver will also be part of the construction of the coming third temple. This is why brass is mentioned in the merchandise of Revelation 18:12. The brass laver is just one of the many items being mentioned in Revelation 18:12 that will be used in the construction of the coming third temple. The Temple Institute is currently behind the plans to build the third temple in Jerusalem. You can see here that they have the brass laver being built. Now let us look at the silver mentioned in Revelation 18:12. The temple construction included many silver vessels. The silver trumpets, for example, were for the priests. These silver trumpets are mentioned in Numbers chapter 10 verse 1 and 2, and verse 8. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Make thee 2 trumpets of silver, of a whole piece shalt thou make them, that thou mayest use them for the calling of the assembly, and for the journeying of the camps. And the sons of Aaron, the priests, shall blow with the trumpets, and they shall be to you for an ordinance forever throughout your generations. These trumpets are also made by the Temple Institute in preparation for the third temple, as you see here with the priests. Now let us look at the spices and oil of Revelation 18 verse 13. Cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, and oil. These items describe the anointing oil and the incense used in the priest services inside the temple. Let us look to Exodus chapter 30. We see in Exodus chapter 30 verse 23 the cinnamon mentioned. We also see the myrrh and the calamus. In verse 24 and 25 we see cassia and olive oil. These ointments are what are used to make the anointing oil for the third temple, the cinnamon, the ointments, and oil. Now let us look at the incense burnt on the altar inside the temple. And the Lord said unto Moses, Take unto thee sweet spices, stacked, and onycha, and galbanum, these sweet spices with pure frankincense, of each shall there be a like weight. And thou shalt make it a perfume, a confection after the art of the apothecary, tempered together, pure and holy. This perfume made out of sweet spices and frankincense is what is described in Revelation 18:13. The items of odors and frankincense are referring to the incense used at the altar of incense in the coming third temple. The Temple Institute has golden frankincense vessels prepared for the third temple, as you see here. Now let us look at the wine, oil, and fine flour found in Revelation 18:13. All these items are used in temple services, including the animal sacrifices. In Leviticus chapter 23 verse 13 we read, And the meat offering thereof shall be 2/10 deals of fine flour mingled with oil, an offering made by fire unto the Lord for a sweet savor. And the drink offering thereof shall be of wine, the 4th part of an hin. The beasts and sheep in Revelation 18:13, along with the wine, oil, and fine flour, are all being used for temple sacrifices. The sheep are used for the lamb offering. In Exodus chapter 29, verse 38 and verse 40, we see, Now this is that which thou shalt offer upon the altar, 2 lambs of the first year, day by day continually. And with the 1 lamb a 10th deal of flour mingled with the 4th part of an hin of beaten oil, and the 4th part of an hin of wine for a drink offering. The beasts in Revelation 18 verse 13 are also referenced to sacrifices. In Numbers chapter 19 verse 2 and 3 we see this. This red heifer and the sacrifice of it is needed in order to build the third temple. On June 12, 2014, the Temple Institute released a video declaring that a red heifer has been born. The sacrifice of the red heifer makes way for the daily sacrifices in Exodus 29 verse 38 to begin. These daily sacrifices are what will be stopped by the Antichrist's Islamic armies coming into Jerusalem at the middle of the tribulation, mentioned in Daniel 11:31. These animal sacrifices that will be started and stopped at the third temple are why sheep, beasts, wine, oil, and fine flour are mentioned in the prophecy of Babylon, further confirming that Jerusalem is Mystery Babylon. The wheat. The wheat is part of the grain offering during the Feast of Weeks. The grain harvest lasts 7 weeks, according to Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 9 and 10. 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee. Begin to number the 7 weeks from such time as thou beginnest to put the sickle to the corn. And thou shalt keep the Feast of Weeks unto the Lord thy God, with a tribute of a freewill offering of thine hand, which thou shalt give unto the Lord thy God, according as the Lord thy God hath blessed thee. At the time of the end of the Feast of Weeks, 2 loaves of wheat bread are given as an offering at the temple. Exodus chapter 34, verse 22. And thou shalt observe the Feast of Weeks, of the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end. This is why wheat is mentioned in Revelation chapter 18, verse 13, because of the third temple in Babylon having wheat harvest offerings for the Feast of Weeks. Fine flour. One of the uses for this fine flour was for the showbread that was in the temple. Leviticus chapter 24, 5 through 7. And thou shalt take fine flour and bake 12 cakes thereof. 2/10 deals shall be in 1 cake. And thou shalt set them in 2 rows, 6 on a row, upon the pure table before the Lord. And thou shalt put pure frankincense upon each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord. This bread made out of the fine flour would be placed on a golden table inside the temple, according to Exodus chapter 25, verse 30. And thou shalt set upon the table shewbread before me alway. This bread is also why the fine flour is listed in the items of Revelation chapter 18, verse 13. The third temple ordinances will require this bread. Now let us look at the purple, scarlet, fine linen, gold, and silver from Revelation chapter 18, verse 12. The merchandise mentioned of the fine linen, purple, scarlet, gold, and silver are needed to construct the curtains in the third temple. One of these curtains is called the veil, described in the following verses. Exodus chapter 26, verse 1. Moreover, thou shalt make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen, and blue, and purple, and scarlet, with cherubims. Of cunning work shalt thou make them. The veil is described as being purple, scarlet, and fine linen. The scarlet is also known as crimson, as seen here in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 14. The veil is also described in Exodus chapter 26, verse 31 through 33. And thou shalt make a veil of blue, and purple, and scarlet, and fine twined linen, of cunning work, with cherubims shall it be made. And thou shalt hang it upon 4 pillars of shittim wood overlaid with gold. Their hooks shall be of gold, upon the 4 sockets of silver. And thou shalt hang up the veil under the taches, that thou mayest bring in thither within the veil the ark of the testimony. And the veil shall divide unto you between the holy place and the most holy. The holy place from Exodus chapter 26, verse 33 is referencing a location in the temple. The first century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus in his writings used specific terminology relating to the temple in Jerusalem. The Apostle John, who wrote the book of Revelation, surely knew such terminology is used to describe artifacts for the temple. Apostle John lived at the time of Josephus. In Josephus' writings, he wrote that the whole temple was called the holy place. This confirms that Matthew 24:15 is describing the temple. And it says, When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Bishop Irenaeus wrote about this in 180 AD. He said, But when this Antichrist shall have devastated all things in this world, he will reign for 3 years and 6 months and sit in the temple at Jerusalem. He understood there was another temple to come. By 70 AD, the second temple was already destroyed, and by 180 AD, he wrote about another temple. He understood the Antichrist would go into this temple and persecute the church, why he wrote this, quote, and shall give their kingdom to the beast and put the church to flight. This is reflective of what is spoken about in Matthew 24, verse 16. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Now, going back to the items listed in Revelation 18, let us look at the silk and the marble in Revelation 18, verse 12. Beginning with the silk, God had clothed Jerusalem in the past with the temple, and one of the items Jerusalem was clothed with was silk. Ezekiel chapter 16. Again, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, cause Jerusalem to know her abominations. I clothed thee also with broidered work, and shod thee with badger's skin. And I girded thee about with fine linen, and I covered thee with silk. Thus wast thou decked with gold and silver, and thy raiment was of fine linen and silk, and broidered work. Thou didst eat fine flour and honey and oil, and thou wast exceeding beautiful, and thou didst prosper into a kingdom. This was said to Jerusalem because of Solomon's temple. Now let us look at the marble in Revelation 18 verse 12 and compare it with the Old Testament temple construction. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29 verse 2, we see the marble stones in abundance mentioned. This is an item used for temple construction. Comparing the items in both Revelation chapter 18 verse 12 and 1 Chronicles chapter 29 verse 2, we see that the temple construction is what is being described. Comparing what was done during the construction of the temple in the time of Solomon and the revelation of the third temple in Babylon, we see chariots and horses mentioned. The chariots and horses were used during the days of Solomon for the construction of the temple. We also see that ivory was brought in as well. This is why we see ivory mentioned in Revelation chapter 18 verse 12. The Temple Institute has an archaeological find section for the Temple Mount. The Temple Institute knows very well that ivory combs were found at the Temple Mount. They also believe that these ivory combs were used for the ritual purification of the priests before entering the temple courts. This is why we see ivory mentioned in Revelation chapter 18 verse 12. July 27, 2014, the Temple Institute released a video to the world with the message about the third temple they plan to build. They declare that this is the generation and that the children are ready. Prophecy written over 1900 years ago by the Apostle John in the book of Revelation, detailing every specific item relating to a third temple, will soon be coming to pass. The coming third temple will be located in Jerusalem, otherwise known as Mystery Babylon the Great.